It all started with something as simple as a mailbox. The protagonist, an ordinary homeowner, never thought a small object on the edge of their property would lead to an all-out war. The mailbox had always been in the same spot. No issues. But then came Karen, the neighbor who couldn't seem to mind her own business. At first, it was just a minor incident, a crooked mailbox. Nothing out of the ordinary. The protagonist thought it could have been the wind or maybe even a kid messing around. But then it happened again. And again. Each week. The mailbox was knocked over. Sometimes left leaning awkwardly against the post. The protagonist started to feel paranoid. But the truth soon came into focus when they installed a security camera to keep an eye on things after noticing some strange disappearances in the neighborhood. Late one night, the footage revealed something that made the protagonist's blood boil. There was Karen, in a floral robe and slippers, sneaking up to the mailbox under the cover of darkness. With a swift kick, she sent the box crashing to the ground. It was deliberate. Not an accident. Every week, like clockwork, Karen would find a way to damage the mailbox. As if it was some kind of personal vendetta. And just like that, what seemed like a harmless object became the battleground of a growing conflict. The protagonist decided enough was enough. If Karen wanted to make this a war, they were ready to escalate it. Fed up with Karen's constant harassment, the protagonist knew it was time to take action. They couldn't just keep fixing the mailbox only to have it knocked over again. This time, they were going to install something that would put an end to the madness once and for all. After a few days of research, the solution was clear: titanium. The protagonist decided to go all in and ordered a heavy-duty titanium mailbox, reinforced with solid concrete, that could withstand anything. There would be no more repairs. No more bending to Karen's tantrums. This mailbox was about to become a symbol of defiance. The next morning, the protagonist stood on their front lawn, overseeing the installation. The titanium post was firmly embedded into the ground with reinforced concrete, making it nearly impossible to move. The mailbox itself, a sleek and impenetrable structure, gleamed under the sun. It was a masterpiece. One that would stand tall against even the most determined of vandals. As the work was completed, Karen, of course, couldn't resist. She drove by slowly, her eyes narrowing as she saw the new installation. There was no way she could ignore it now. That evening, just as expected, Karen appeared, flashlight in hand, dressed in her signature floral robe. With the same determination, she approached the mailbox, ready to unleash her fury. Without hesitation, she kicked it with all her might. The impact was so intense. It was like she'd kicked a steel wall. Her foot bounced back violently, sending her stumbling backward, her body flailing before she hit the ground with a painful thud. The flashlight flew out of her hand, rolling away as she clutched her foot, writhing in pain. The mailbox, still standing tall, unscathed, and completely unbothered. The protagonist watched the scene unfold from the comfort of their home, sipping their coffee with a smug smile. Karen's pride had been shattered. And for the first time, she knew she had lost. Despite the painful humiliation of her failed attempt to destroy the indestructible mailbox, Karen wasn't ready to accept defeat. No. She wasn't one to back down easily, especially when her pride had been bruised. The very next day, the protagonist received a letter. Karen was suing for damages. She claimed that the mailbox was a dangerous structure, designed to cause harm, and she demanded compensation for her injury. The audacity! The protagonist couldn't believe what they were reading. Not only had Karen wrecked their property, but now she was accusing them of intentionally setting up a dangerous hazard. It was laughable. But the protagonist wasn't worried. They had something Karen didn't expect: evidence. They had captured her every move on the security camera, the footage that clearly showed her kicking the mailbox and causing her own injury. They couldn't have asked for a better piece of evidence. The day of the court hearing arrived. And Karen, limping dramatically into the courtroom with her foot wrapped in a bandage, made quite the show of being the victim. She sat smugly, ready to present her case, her lawyer speaking for her with all the confidence in the world. When it was time for the protagonist to speak, they simply handed over a USB stick to the judge, which contained the damning footage. The courtroom watched in silence as Karen was seen kicking the titanium mailbox, her foot recoiling with such force that she was sent tumbling backward. The silence in the room was deafening, the judge watching intently as Karen's face turned beet red. "Madam." The judge finally spoke, his voice heavy with disapproval. "Did you, or did you not, kick the structure of your own free will?" Karen stammered, her lawyer fumbling for words. The judge sighed deeply, removing his glasses. "Case dismissed," he said coldly. "Next case." The room erupted in silence, followed by a collective sigh of relief from the other attendees. Karen, humiliated beyond belief, stood up, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Her attempt to sue the protagonist had failed, and she had only made a fool of herself in front of everyone. The protagonist, on the other hand, walked out of the courtroom with a quiet sense of victory, knowing that Karen had lost, both in court and in dignity. Karen, still reeling from her courtroom defeat, wasn't one to let go of a grudge. Her pride had been shattered, but her determination to get revenge on the protagonist burned brighter than ever. Refusing to back down, she hatched a new plan. This time, instead of confronting the protagonist directly, she would rally the community against the dangerous mailbox. She started circulating a petition, claiming that the titanium mailbox posed an imminent threat to children in the neighborhood. It was a ridiculous argument, especially since there were no children in the area. The neighborhood was largely made up of retirees and couples without kids. But Karen didn't care about the truth, she cared about winning. At first, some of the neighbors entertained her, but as soon as they saw the absurdity of her claims, they quickly lost interest. Karen, however, was relentless. She knocked on door after door, her voice becoming more desperate as she tried to garner support. The petition began to gather signatures, but as Karen moved from house to house, the neighbors started whispering among themselves. They all knew what Karen was really up to. This wasn't about a mailbox, it was about her vendetta. And soon, they had had enough. The turning point came when one neighbor, fed up with Karen's antics, decided to take matters into their own hands. They grabbed the petition and, with a sly grin, turned it into the exact opposite of what Karen had intended. Instead of demanding the removal of the mailbox, the petition now called for Karen to be removed from the HOA. Word spread quickly, and in a matter of days, the petition had more signatures than Karen's ever could. It wasn't long before the rest of the neighborhood rallied behind it. The once feared Karen now the target of a movement to oust her from the HOA entirely. Karen's desperate attempt to retaliate had completely backfired. Her neighbors, who had long suffered under her reign of petty complaints and ridiculous rules, were finally united in one goal: to get rid of her once and for all. The movement was gaining momentum. And it was only a matter of time before Karen realized that her days in the neighborhood were numbered. The day of the community meeting arrived. And the atmosphere in the hall was electric. The entire neighborhood had gathered. Some out of curiosity. Others eager for the downfall of the woman who had made their lives a living hell for so long. Karen, of course, showed up. Her posture still trying to project her usual sense of superiority. But there was something different about her now. She knew, deep down, that she had lost. The others in the room weren't looking at her with admiration, they were looking at her like she was the problem. And everyone knew it. The meeting began. And the board leader cleared his throat, preparing to make the announcement. We've received multiple formal complaints regarding Ms. Karen's conduct. After careful consideration, the HOA board has decided to put her removal from the neighborhood to a vote. Karen's face turned pale. She tried to stand up, her voice shaky as she sputtered protests, blaming the protagonist, calling it all a conspiracy. But no one was listening. The neighbors had had enough. And they were finally standing up to her. The vote was swift and unanimous. Karen was officially expelled from the neighborhood. The finality of it all hit her like a ton of bricks. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked around, desperate for someone to side with her. But it was too late. The room was filled with applause for the first time in years. The loudest cheer echoing through the hall. Karen had been defeated. Her reign of terror over the HOA coming to an abrupt and satisfying end. The next few weeks were pure bliss for the protagonist. The once dreaded figure of Karen was gone. And the entire neighborhood felt lighter, freer. The neighbors, who had once been hesitant to speak up against her, now greeted each other with smiles and friendly waves. The protagonist, secretly savoring every moment of this newfound peace, made sure to stop by Karen's house every day, waving cheerfully as the for sale sign appeared in her yard. Finally, the day came when the house was sold. And with it, Karen vanished from the neighborhood forever. No more complaints. No more ridiculous rules. No more Karen. The protagonist stood on their front porch, looking across the street with a feeling of triumph. The mailbox, untouched and standing strong, was now a symbol of their victory. It was a perfect ending to a long and hard-fought battle, and Karen, she was nothing more than a distant memory.